If I act like I'm the winner, they'll surely just make me do it. From Autosport.com and Autosport Magazine, I'm Kevin Turner, and this is the Autosport Podcast. Well, welcome to a new series of the Autosport Podcast, celebrating 75 years of the Drivers' World Championship. Formula One has been celebrating that all season, and we thought we'd get in on the act. There's a particular reason for that, and that is because there is a new book, The 100 Greatest Races, which seems to be a rather good subject for us. And the author and another of my colleagues is here to discuss that. I'll be introducing them shortly. But basically, we're going to go look at the 100 greatest races, but we're not going to do a countdown from 100 because, well, that would take a long time. We're going to break this down into 10 episodes, just like we have done in the book. So the first person I'm going to introduce is the man behind the book, Roger Smith. Roger, welcome to the Autosport Podcast. How are you doing? And I guess the first question is, why? Why have we done this together? You roped me into helping, and then you've been very nice to put my name on the cover. But really, it's your work. So what was the reason behind it?
Well, thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm grateful and interested to see how this is going to go. It's my first go at this sort of thing. But you said it at the beginning. 75 years of Formula One. It seemed the right moment, really, to produce a view of all the races that have taken part over this time, all the best races that have taken part over this time. And you and I have been working together on race ratings for a number of years.
Yeah, 2020, 2021, I think, yeah.
Something like that. And it was natural then to ask you whether you were interested in sort of working with me, because just another Roger Smith book about the 100 races goes only so far. It needs a bit of gravitas with the names like
oh, goodness. But failing that, you got me.
Kevin Turner and Karen Shandok involved. So yes. I was very grateful when Karen agreed to write the foreword and has been sort of in the background, sort of keeping an eye on things. Yes, we'll have
him on in some future episodes of this, won't we, as
well?
Yes,
that would be good.
So it'd be interesting to see if he disagrees with our own lists, given that he helped us with them. I think, given some of his emails recently, I suspect he actually will be disagreeing with us.
I've got a feeling we're going to have trouble there.
But also, I mean, you already had the groundwork for a lot of this, because obviously with your previous books with the race pods, you've got, I mean, I use them as a reference tool.
Good
you
man.
Basically cover every single World Championship race, don't you? Including the Indy 500s from 1950 to 60 when they're part of the Championship. So we've used that as a basis for the book, haven't we? And then we've expanded on the top three of each.
Just to get the stats out there, that when the 75th anniversary took place on the 13th of May 2025, 1,120 Grand Prix had been run up to that point, excluding those 11 Indy 500 races from 1950 to 1960. It's not definitive. Nothing's definitive in this world, particularly when you're applying the word greatest. And what is the definition of greatest?
Well, and actually, I think the difference, I'll bring you in a minute, Stuart. We won't just have this chat the whole time.
I was going to say, ask people on the internet, they'll tell you whether you're wrong when you've decided that
of course they will.
Yes, I mean...
And you can't ask back necessarily.
It's probably fair to say, if you were doing just 100, you wouldn't necessarily have the same hunt. They'd be very similar, there'd be overlap. I mean, I think we had 120 odd races that we were looking at.
Well remembered.
But because we've broken them into specific categories, that obviously directs you. So it's just a slightly different way of doing it, but hopefully one that's quite fun and interesting. It means you cover off lots of different races, lots of different periods, and lots of different types of race as well. So before we get into the first one, I will introduce my second guest, even though he's already started talking.
Butted in,
I'm going to introduce you earlier next time. Stuart Codling, who is you still on the F1 beat. So how have you found 2025?
Well, it's been different, hasn't it? Quite exciting. It hasn't panned out exactly as everyone expected.
No.
We've had some good races. We have had some processional dire races as well. Despite the best efforts of everyone to introduce some tactical variety, the problem is the teams just find a way of turning every race into a one-stopper, don't they? So,
but also, I think you have to accept sometimes there will be a dull race. They can't all be exciting.
They can't. Imagine how big a book would have been if it was 1,000 and 100 and whatever greatest races.
Yeah, I mean, also, you don't want every... I used to cover club racing, catering races. They're always exciting, but they don't have... But because there's always overtaking, and it's only the last lap that ever matters. And if they're all the races like that, then it's a bit...
I think that's absolutely true.
You need, I think, a bit of variety, and you almost need the boring ones to appreciate the great ones. But I know that obviously the insatiable desire for drama and excitement with current social media and stuff means that we're not allowed to have boring races.
You're making
but
it sound
we
very
just do.
old. You can actually have a boring race that ends excitingly and people remember it as exciting because of peak end effect.
That is it's almost like you've read some notes there.
It's a great topic for a future podcast.
And here it comes.
The race came alive.
Yes. So, well, actually, the first one we're looking at, the first chapter in the book, the first episode in this series, is called Thrillers. Roger, how would you like to define that? How do you feel that we went about it? Because I feel like that what Stuart said there about close finishes, even if the race up to that point maybe isn't the best, is kind of what we're looking at in this one.
Well, it was two things actually that we brought together because close finishes in a Grand Prix obviously is invariably exciting, but we're talking here about really close finishes because 1 second isn't a close finish in Formula One. I mean, you can see a big gap between the chap taking
an
the
F1 car moves a long way in a second.
Well, I mean, I've worked out a few figures, and you're going to get bored with me working out a few figures. But if you think about an average 3-mile track and 90 seconds to go round it, I mean, these are just broad numbers. Then 1 second represents 180 feet in old money. Okay, feet. I'm sorry, I can't tell it to you in another form. But
other measurement types are available.
So 1 second's 180 feet. 1/10 is therefore 18 feet, and therefore 1/100th is 1.8 feet. Now that's getting close.
Yeah.
And so we're talking in this Thrillers one about those sorts of races. You know, when it really gets down to a wheel between the winner and the loser.
Well, our first one, we're going to do, as we normally do with our top 10s, we're going to count down from 10 to 1 because that's more exciting. Number 10 is the 2016 Austrian Grand Prix. Now, this is really here, isn't it, because of Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg, the last lap. Hamilton's coming back at Rosberg. Rosberg sort of lucked into being on the right strategy in this race, despite the fact that Hamilton was on pole. And Hamilton found himself behind Rosberg, but catching him, and had a go on the last lap. Now, Stuart, you'd have been F1 racing editor at this point, wouldn't you? I would think.
I think I think I rejoiced in the title of the executive editor.
Well, what does that mean, executive editor? Now, my view on this is that Rosberg forgot to turn into the corner and was going to straight line his way somewhere else. And
it reminded me of someone else, actually, more recently.
Yes, it is true.
Definitely going to be in trouble.
He basically tried to run Hamilton off, didn't he? Which, I think nowadays there are guidelines to deal with that, but it was literally the two cars going to the corner, and neither of them seem to. One of them wants to turn in, but can't because the other one hasn't. And then wasn't there some screeching over the radio, each blaming the other? There always is, isn't there?
Of course.
Yes, and of course we had. I mean, this is why it was a dramatic finish, because you had both cars with various bits of damage flying off them, but Hamilton's car was less damaged, and actually he did manage to go on and keep the win. So, is there anything you wanted to add on that one, Roger? I think it's probably fairly clear as to why that one's in there. It's all about that last lap, isn't it?
It is. I didn't go on earlier on to say that the other form of thriller we've got here is a last lap lead change, and that's why this one's here. We've got, in fact, out of the 10 in this chapter, we've got 6 which are last lap lead changes and 4 which are incredibly close.
Yes, almost
results.
last lap lead changes.
Yeah. I would say that actually there was an element of intrigue earlier in the race because, of course, you mentioned Rosberg looking onto the better strategy, but there was a lot of intrigue because if you remember throughout that year, Lewis kind of was coming to this weird belief that somehow Rosberg was being given some sort of unfair advantage, that he was being favoured. You remember famously he had the engine failure in Malaysia and accused the team of sabotaging him, and so there was a lot.
Did he, or was it more his fans that abused?
A little bit. I think he sort of might have made an illusion that the fan
I don't remember him coming out right
on.
and saying that was on purpose.
Yeah, there was some sort of hint.
Intrigue.
There was some nudge, wink, wink, and the toxic social media jumped on top of it. But yeah, earlier in that Austrian Grand Prix, there was the whole business of should Lewis have pitted? Why wasn't he brought out? And his engineer was saying to him at the end, "You are on the best tyres for this bit," and he kind of said, okay, right, yeah, it is working. But right up until that point, there was an atmosphere of, is Hamilton being stitched up by his own team here? Which, of course, is absolute nonsense, but that's what people think, and that's what the commentators speculate about with no evidence whatsoever when there's nothing else going on in the race.
Was this on the basis that Rosberg was in the team first, or quite what was the grounding of that?
Like all conspiracy theories, it's inherently self-affirming. So if you ask a question like that, it's because that's what they want you to think.
Okay.
I mean, also, I think it's probably worth saying that Rosberg earlier in his career had sometimes been criticised for being too soft in wheel-to-wheel fights.
Yeah.
Hamilton had got the better of him a few times, and I think he then almost overcompensated with some of his later moves. He didn't quite get that sweet spot of hard but fair, I think, because I don't think he was a dirty driver per se. I just don't think he quite knew how to. I don't think he knew how to race Hamilton.
No,
really.
So that's why he defaulted to the forgetting to let off the brakes.
Yes,
exactly.
The forgetting to turn into a right hand. Anyway, I think we've done that one enough. So number 9, a different kind of last lap change, the 1997 Hungarian Grand Prix, and I have to say this was an emotional one for me, but probably not quite as much as an emotional one for Arrows, given that this was the closest they ever got to winning a World Championship Grand Prix. So, Roger, do you want to run us through the basics of why this race is here?
It's a great race, and it's surprising in a way. It's only at number 9, but just shows how much greater ones are ahead of us. You've got to remember the background, whereby here was the reigning world champion in an extraordinary car, the Arrows Yamaha, with Bridgestone tyres. And I think that was probably the thing that had attracted him, was the fact that it was sort of a maybe possibility when everything could come together and the Yamaha engine, which was underpowered, would work, and the Bridgestone tyres and so on. And it did on that particular race. He came in behind Schumacher and I think overtook him with a sort of, quite a
the Goodyear runners were all blistering their rubber, weren't they? Apart from the ones that started. I think Hans-Hal Frentzen and Johnny Herbert started on the harder Goodyear compound. Everyone else was on the soft, and Schumacher had gone through his soft in about 9 or 10 laps. And and
he pushed by, didn't he?
He pushed by and then disappeared.
Well, apart from Heinz-Harald Frentzen did actually sort of come into the scene, but he went out, so that was good. And he pulled away, and he had 35 seconds or something by the closing laps when suddenly he started slowing down, and everybody was there, I'm sure, urging this guy to get to the finish.
Classic peak-end effect, isn't it? And also, that was another thing. There was bizarre theories circulating after that race, because that car had done absolutely nothing up until that point, and didn't really do anything again.
Jerez. Could have been on pole in Jerez.
One of the other factors behind Damon going there was, apart from not having a job at Williams and no other things being available, was that John Barnard was coming, having severed his relations with Ferrari, and apparently he said to Damon, he said, Damon, the first thing we need to do is make it safe. Your car.
That's concerning, isn't it?
I think Damon would have agreed with that. Generally.
I mean, he does say that it's the race he gets asked about the most. Not winning the championship at Suzuka 96 or Suzuka 94, which was probably his greatest drive, but that race, I think it's because it was so unexpected. It's such an unusual race, which gets it onto this list. Any objections to this being on the list, Stuart?
No, it's very exciting.
We didn't consult you on these lists, so if there's anything you vehemently disagree with, you have to say. So number 8, we're a completely different era, 1953 Italian Grand Prix. This is the first, but very much not the last appearance of Monza in this list. And this is also a good time to remind everyone that the World Championship, it's not 75 years of F1, is it? Because 2 of those years were run to Formula 2 regulations.
Yes.
The scene is Ferrari winning everything, Alberto Ascari already a double world champion. But this is a race he didn't win, Roger, and it was all decided... Well, I think it was the last corner rather than the last lap.
Yes, an extraordinary thing. I mean, Ascari spun. I mean, imagine the situation, if somebody spins out on the last lap these days.
Ascari, you could guarantee, would be on the same line.
I mean, in his defence, of course, he was in a fight with Giuseppe Farina and Juan Manuel Fangio.
Yes.
And so Ascari, and of course, Onuf Merriman was involved as well, but he was a lap behind. And chaos kicked off at Parabolica, didn't it, on the last lap?
Yes. And Fangio, he has this knack, doesn't he, of sort of tiptoeing through chaos. I mean, he did it at Monaco. He's done it at other times.
Well, the Le Mans 55 accident he was virtually in the middle of and somehow wasn't.
And he did it again, whereas, sort of, I think Marimon sort of broadsided with Farina, I think it might have been. Sort of Fangio goes through, wins the race, gives Maserati a home win at Monza, which is fantastic because, Maserati winning at Monza is just as exciting, I would imagine, for the Italians. Or not.
Perhaps back then it would have been.
I think
it was their first World Championship win as well, of course.
Yes, of course it was, yes.
And the A6 GCM, weirdly one of my favourite cars of that era.
Yeah.
Really?
With the Colombo modified form. Yeah. Great looking car.
Nice looking car. Very nice.
Interesting. Yeah, and of course he'd missed most of 52 due to his accident in the season, Fangio.
Yes.
Right, number 7. We're going forward 52 years.
Yeah.
2005 European Grand Prix at the Nürburgring.
I certainly remember this one very clearly because it was one that got me out of my seat. This is what I saw on television. Well, many of them have been on television. I've got a few here that are live. But that was one, and I don't really remember it equally, when suddenly his front suspension collapsed. He thought he'd made it, but suddenly it collapsed and Alonso went through. I thought, it was one of those moments when you had to sort of get up and say, crikey, this is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it was like an even more ridiculous version of Mansell stalling his car on the last lap in Canada, wasn't it?
Yes.
But this was sort of...
Certainly more dramatic.
It was his fault, not his fault, wasn't it? Because you could say, oh, well, he flat-spotted his tyres and that set up a vibration. But if it hadn't been for Max Mosley's ridiculous no pit stops rule to change tyres rule that year, then he would have been... There wouldn't have been a question.
No, but Alonso would still have won the race.
There is that.
And I think that this is one of those races where I think that sometimes people say it was a lucky Alonso win, but I don't buy that. I think that he was relentless in his pursuit in that Renault, and he forced Raikkonen's error. And then because of the rules, as you say, at that time, McLaren and Raikkonen decided, and you probably would, wouldn't you, to go for a Grand Prix win, and they were trying to make up a gap in the points. So they couldn't really afford to let Alonso have another win.
Because he'd started slowly, hadn't he?
They'd not got the best out of the car to start with, and they'd had various grid penalties, hadn't they, with engine problems and all sorts. So he was trying to play catch up in the championship. So I can totally understand why they stayed out and tried it. But I also think that Alonso earned that win. He kind of made his own luck, I think.
Utterly agree with you. He put him under pressure, flat-spotted his tyres, and he paid the price later on in that incredible moment.
It was, and he almost hit, was it Jenson Button's...
Yeah,
I think for turning into the first, or Honda would have been by then, wouldn't it? Or turning into the first corner. So it could have been, worse. Must have been quite scary actually having the suspension go like that. But yeah, that was the 1 year rule of no tyre stops, wasn't it?
It was also the first race. I noted down that after they abandoned the ridiculous aggregate qualifying system. Do you remember when qualifying was run on aggregate?
That was simply awful.
Yeah.
Right, let's move on to number 6. This had to be in here.
This is one where I was there.
Were you? So,
Monza, 1969.
69 Italian Grand Prix. What do you remember from being there?
That I had my wife-to-be by my side. That's the main thing I remember. Oh,
that's
sorry.
a good answer.
It's a good answer.
The motor racing was fantastic. And you've made the point to me about the long fourth gear. Was it fourth gear?
Long fourth, which Stuart had worked on in throughout practice. I think when I spoke to him about it, he said he was known for obviously setting up for the race rather than qualifying or practice as it was called then. And I think he said that this was he never spent so much time in a practice session just working on the finish of the race because he knew there's a very good chance that at Monza pre-chicanes, of course, it would be a slipstreaming finish.
But that's possibly the reason why it isn't higher. He was in leading for 58, I think, of 68 laps. So he always had that little edge.
Yeah.
And he did it, on the last lap as well.
I think I remember seeing an interview with Ken Tyrrell, who of course ran the Matra, saying that that year they were giving out prize money at quarter distance, half distance, 3/4 distance, and obviously the result. And obviously Jackie Stewart made sure that
he's Scottish.
And he said it was like a cash register going off in his head, which I love. But that shows you how in control. What looks like an amazing race and all the rest of it, he's just that bit more in control than everyone else, which I think is class, to be honest. Jackie Stewart won and clinched his first world title, of course, as well. And to back up Roger's point about close finish, Jochen Rindt Lotus was 0.08 of a second behind. Jean-Pierre Beltoise in the other Matra was 0.17 behind. And fourth place, off the podium, Bruce McLaren, 0.19 seconds behind. Imagine being less than 2/10 off the winner and
for
not
the
on the
four.
podium.
Yes.
Absolutely
Yes.
ridiculous.
Yes.
And the footage of that does exist. So have a look for it.
Well,
It's
yes. If you
worth
want to go
watching.
down a YouTube rabbit hole, then that's a great place to start, I think.
What I remember, apart from my wife-to-be and the result, of course, he won the championship, Stuart, based on that win. So it was another great moment for one to be there during a championship victory. Was that afterwards we found our way into the paddock, and there was Frank Williams speaking to Piers Courage, and they were both, and we sort of stood there as though we were part of the conversation, as in the usual way, and they were both absolutely elated because it was the first time they'd ever led a Grand Prix, and they were over the moon. They were so full of it.
So number 5, 1982 Austrian Grand Prix on the fearsome Ring circuit. Stuart, I'll come to you first on this one. This is one of those classic turbo era races where all the quick cars broke.
Boom!
But, complaining about the one retirement that Lewis Hamilton had in 2016. In 1982, I think Renault led 45% of the laps and only won 4 races. And this was another one where all the turbos broke down, really leaving it to 2 DFE cars.
They were dropping like flies, and I recall within the past few years they've actually repeated that race in full. I think maybe the Sky Sports F1
really?
channel had it on, and really it was utterly ridiculous because everywhere you looked there was someone pulling off in this sort of gush of smoke and steam.
Well, the BMWs always started, blowing up before anyone else, and then the Renaults could do it a bit later.
Alain Prost coaxed his Renault to within about half a dozen laps of the finish.
Yeah,
and even he couldn't get it to the end.
But also a great race to watch because it was the old circuit. So instead of turning right at the top of that little crest, they went straight on round some pretty difficult corners, round the hill, back again.
Very fast,
very fast, very scary. You can see why they snipped it.
And of course, Roger, you have Keke Rosberg, who, for my mind, is one of the most spectacular drivers to watch.
Yeah.
I mean, I know somebody said, we shouldn't have been 82 world
body
champion.
language on a car.
Exactly that. The body language of that Williams, whenever you see footage 1982, beautiful. He is on it. Yeah. So he's chasing Elio De Angelis and the Lotus, but he doesn't quite make it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those that comes alive at the end, over 3 laps. But it was so exciting because you expected Rosberg to make it, and he didn't make it by the smallest of margins. What was it? 5 hundredths. Yeah. And at the time, that was the closest finish that ever happened in Formula One.
And it was so spectacular to watch those final laps because he really was absolutely on it. And it's such a funny looking car, that Williams.
Yes, wasn't it? Yeah.
Because it was designed to be 6-wheeled.
Yes.
So
yes.
The driver's sort of at the front in this sort of narrow little enclosure, and with his legs over the front axle. And you kind of think, how on earth did they balance it? It's such a weird looking car.
I should say also that was Lotus's first win since, I think, the 78 season.
Since Andretti.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right, now we're getting into sort of, I think that's the big hitters. 1986 Spanish Grand Prix. So this is, we're right into Mansell, Piquet at Williams, Senna at Lotus, Prost at McLaren. I mean, that for me is a peak in F1 history, I would argue. Senna actually led early on, then things changed, didn't they? So to talk us through towards the end after that sort of first half of the race.
The end of the race, which is the bit one remembers of mostly, but Mansell had to go in for a tyre change. He'd taken the lead, but he had to go in for a tyre change, and then he had to make up an astonishing, I think it was 20 seconds in 9 laps. Was that the figures?
So my note said 19, but it could be either.
Okay.
They weren't quite timing it by hand in those days, but it was a bit ropey.
And so the average he was getting back was 2 seconds a lap on Senna. Now,
he was obviously on old rubber at that point.
He was on old rubber. But nevertheless, you talk about Rosberg being exciting. I think that Mansell wasn't far behind him in many ways as one of the most exciting people to watch. he could do that sort of thing. And this was one of those moments. If it hadn't been for Prost in the McLaren, who was in the way when he came back from his tyre change and held him up for 2 or 3 laps, it's quite probable he would have caught Senna. But those were the key moments when the race went from Mansell. Of course, if you look at the time he lost, it just shows that he was nearly 3 seconds a lap faster, actually.
He'd been wanting blue flags these days, wouldn't he?
Oh yeah, well, yes, yeah. I mean, if you look at the footage on that, just the amount of space, not time, space that Mansell takes out of saying under braking for the hairpin, because he's not quite there, and then he is there, and then obviously it's a sprint to the flag, and you had the classic Mansell drama of I thought the start-finish line was further down, and I'd overtaken him by then, but then knew obviously that it was the early
got on
one.
a bit of wide stuff.
Yeah. But what I found interesting about this one is that Prost at the time said that if he'd realised that Mansell could win the race, he wouldn't have made it so difficult for him to get past. But if you then fast forward a few months to Adelaide finale, those 3 points that Mansell would have got had Prost let him through more easily would have been the distance between Mansell and winning the championship instead of Prost. So I wonder if his view then changed a few months later. But yeah, fantastic finish, and 2 of the sort of the iconic images, aren't there? JPS Lotus and the yellow, white and blue Williams. So I think we're into the realm now where the races aren't just about the finish. I think that was an interesting race on quite a few laps running up to that.
Yeah.
Something happening all the way through, which is why it's a bit higher on the list. I haven't asked you whether you disagree with any of these for a while. I'm detecting non.
I don't disagree for all the reasons applied above. In that these, now we're getting to the sharp end. They were races that were interesting in and of themselves before we got to the last lap drama or the final few laps drama.
Well, let's get into the top 3 then. The big 3, which in the book get a bit of extra treatment. That's where I played my small part in helping you get a few extra quotes and things. We've interviewed quite a few of these drivers over the years.
If we could find the driver's voice to sort of be speaking about the race, where we could find something that was quotable.
Now, in this one, it didn't quite tick that box, as it was, for all the will in the world, difficult to get quotes from Jim Clark about the 1967 Italian Grand Prix. Now, I think this is in the list for 2 reasons. One is Clark's fantastic drive, but also the incredible finish between John Surtees and Jack Brabham. Which bit for you is the more important in getting up this high, do you think, Roger?
Clark fell out on the last lap, I think it was, and left it to these 2 guys, and they finished 0.2 apart, and that's why it's here. It's because it's, again, one of the closest finishes in Formula One history. And I have to say, I can still remember. It was probably black and white television, but watching that Grand Prix, and again, I was, those moments I can remember where you get out of your seat and seeing Brabham lose it slightly and go sideways as he came round Parabolica. I think there was some cement dust down or something, and then Surtees, take the lead, and I don't think he'd actually been in the lead ever before during the race.
No, I think
so. I think he took the lead in those final few hundred meters. It was just extraordinary.
I mean, wasn't it such a fascinating contrast of styles between Surtees and Brabham? Because Brabham always had that sort of dirt track style. You could see that he'd grown up on the midget cars in Australia. Surtees, who'd won all those championships on motorbikes with really skinny tyres, and just you had to have so much finesse. So they had that fascinating contrast of styles. Even if that was just the battle for second place, which it had been up until that point, and then of course you have Jim Clark, who was utterly peerless. The current team boss of McLaren, the last Grand Prix, said we're looking at probably the greatest class of drivers of all time, maybe, and on Autosport.com we had a little writer's opinion of do we agree with him or not, and I think I said I think 65 was probably in the ballpark, because you had lots and lots of great drivers on the grid, but also someone who towered above them, and that was Jim Clark, wasn't it? You had all these great drivers on the grid, certainly in this race, where he just made them all look like they were in a draw below.
I would say that Lotus 49 did that because of the Cosworth DFV. That's not to belittle Clark's performance, which is coming from a lap down to take the lead after a puncture. But in the process of him coming through from that lap down, he and Graham Hill actually did a little bit of towing. Graham was his teammate in the other Lotus, and the two of them actually, over a long period of time, I think Clark took a couple of seconds out of Hill over that long comeback. So that shows you that at Lotus pace, it was taking a huge amount of chunks out of everyone else. The reason that there was cement dust down at the entry to Parabolica on the last lap was because Graham Hill's Cosworth blew up. So he cruises in, putting oil down. Clark comes through. That basically suddenly means that Clark, instead of being a minute and something off the lead, is only a few seconds. What goes straight past the Hondola, which is what John Surtees is in, and Brabham, and then has, I think, a fuel pump issue or fuel fee or something like that, which slows him. So they go past him. So Surtees, I've seen an interview with him about this. He knew where the cement dust was, and he said, "I'd leave the door open." He said, "I knew that Jack would go through it." He said, "To be honest, I would have done it as well." Brabham comes down and he has all over the shot trying to get control of it. Surtees actually tucks up the inside on the exit, doesn't he? And Brabham actually then gets back in his slipstream and comes back at him before they get to the line. So again, another one of these with a few more yards down the line, maybe the Brabham would have got back ahead. So yeah, an incredible finish, incredible performance from Clark. So much going on in that race. Right, we will come back to Monza. It's not giving too much away, is it? I don't think. But before we do, we're going to go to a much slower circuit, the 1970 Monaco Grand Prix. I suppose this doesn't have as much going on in it, does it, Roger? In a way, as the Monza race. No. But its shock factor is higher, I suppose. The last lap is. Even now, when I watch it, I still can't believe it happens. It's surely not going to happen this time. so talk us through, set the scene for us, going on to the last lap of the 1970 Monaco Grand Prix.
Well, Jack Brabham, in that year, don't forget. I mean, he was a contender, right? From the beginning,
BT33,
for a fourth championship. You know, when you look back at that race, and you look back also at the British Grand Prix at the time, when I think he ran out of fuel and Rindt took a win.
That's right.
In 1970.
Yeah. And blame Brian Dennis for it.
Brabham was really in great shape and great form, and that particular car of his, the first Monaco Brabham, I believe.
I think so. Yeah.
Was going very, very well. So it did look like Brabham had the whole thing stitched up, but then he got involved in traffic and lost a lot of time, and I think there was a moment when Rindt suddenly thought to himself, "Hang on a minute, I think there's a win possibility here."
Yeah, and he kind of woke up, didn't he?
He did. Yeah. He did. You know, there's some good quotes actually of what Jochen Rindt felt in the book here, which I like as well.
Because they were good friends, weren't they? He'd driven for Brabham the year before.
Yes, of course he had.
I think he quite liked driving for Brabham.
I think because there was which we'll come back to 1969 Lotus issues in a subsequent podcast, I think. But there'd been this whole business at the end of 1969 that Rindt was actually considering his options, and there was a possibility of him going back to Brabham. Jack was going to retire, and it was when Rindt actually went, no. Bernie says that if I stay with Lotus, they'll have a faster car. I'll stay with Lotus. That Brabham had to come out of retirement before he'd retired, and Rindt would have won the championship in that car, I think, as well. That Brabham in 1970.
Quite possibly, although if they'd avoided the bad luck, because obviously some of the points that Jack lost wasn't down to him.
In those closing laps, you really do see Rindt's driving style, that super aggressive sliding the car all over the place.
Well, he laps over the last couple of laps faster than the pole time.
Yeah.
Yes.
In his chase. Now, I've been working on a top 10 Jochen Rindt drives for quite a long time. And a lot of people say this is number one. I'm not sure I can forgive him for being asleep for the first half of the race. As I say, coming down to the last corner and locking up, going into the barriers, and Jack Brabham was not a crasher. And Jochen couldn't believe it, did he? In the quotes, I don't think he could quite believe it.
And I love the way you described it, saying you can look at it again on YouTube and think to yourself, surely he's not going to do it. And he did.
Yes,
because the cameraman's not expecting it either.
No, it's right.
Brabham just disappears off.
Anyway, right, let's get to number one. All our tops are all quite close, covered by 4 years, our top three.
Yes, I noticed that. I worried whether people were going to say,
But so it's the 1971 Italian Grand Prix, which held lots of records for a long time, including being the fastest World Championship race for over 30 years. Well, I mean, Roger, do you want to take it away? Were you at this one as well? Or?
No, I sadly wasn't, but I do, again, remember it very, very well. I like this being at number one because I think Gethin drove a fantastic race that day.
Yeah.
I mean, he'd lost touch early on. He was at least 10 seconds behind the pack, slipstreaming way ahead of him. And as he says in some of the quotes we got here, it wasn't until he was at least 4.5 seconds behind that he began to feel a toe. He'd moved from 10 seconds to 4.5 seconds, purely
Chipping away.
really chipping away and not making any mistakes. He makes that point. I was very pleased with my drive because I just didn't make any mistakes. So it was an incredible drive to catch the leaders. And then over the last 3 laps, I think he led, 1 or 2 of those laps. But the last parabolica braking moment where he dives in, and the car is really on the edge, and he's inside Peterson, as I recall, and then he sort of gets the power on and gets round there, and just what is it, 0.1?
Yeah,
100th.
Yeah. From Ronnie Peterson's march, Francois Severs-Tyrrell was 900ths behind in third.
These are the great, some of the greatest drivers of their time, and now in a lower category, that sort of final corner has disaster written all over it, doesn't it?
Yes. They're 3 abreast, aren't they? At one point,
yes, they are.
Being that close, but it's because of the excellence of all the drivers involved that they just get through it.
Yeah.
What I like about this one as well is that Autosport interviewed Peter Gethin about this as his race of my life many years ago, and you see all the pictures of the finish. He's got his arm in the air, and he said that he decided to do that to convince the Italian officials that he'd won as much as because he thought he'd won. He's like, this is pretty close. I'm going to put my arm. If I act like I'm the winner, they'll surely just make me the winner. Which gives you a bit of an insight into the difference between timing in those days as it does today. Any objection to this being number 1? I mean, this is one of the sort of seminal 0.6 of a second cover of the top 5. Also, we haven't even mentioned Chris Amon leading the race and ripping his visor off. Instead of just and Joe Siffett was involved with. I mean, it's a win for BRM, of course. The V12 towards the end of BRM's time at the front of Formula 1. Peter Gethin's only race victory. And it was during that course of that season that Ronnie Peterson really emerged and finished second in the championship despite not winning a race.
Yeah.
So lots of storylines going on.
And the car, the BRM, in that livery of Yardley BRM, one of the most gorgeous.
P160 is a nice car, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean the car, but the livery. Have you ever done
not
livery?
Such a fan. Well, funnily enough, I have started one.
I used to wear Yardley at the time.
That's right. The Yardley one, I don't know. I'm not sure. It's a bit too white, I think, for me. It's a bit too much white.
I've never worn Yardley. I quite like the.
It's not what I was expecting. Not sure whether I've lost control of this or not. Really,
you're teetering on the brake. I think you've got it sideways.
I'm lifting,
let's
turning.
Don't feather it too much. I think it's great in its pure form. I think it's up there with the Martini livery, maybe. When you've got a clean car and a sort of a blank canvas for a fairly simplistic logo, before they sort of became, I'm sounding dangerously like an old fogey now, aren't I, with this sort of, before they got cluttered with lots of stickers. But that sort of uncluttered logo, amazing.
So I'll just quickly run down the list of our top 10 thrillers in F1 history. The 2016 Austrian Grand Prix, 1997 Hungarian Grand Prix, 1953 Italian Grand Prix, which is a Formula 2 race. Just reminding everyone that we don't think it's a Formula 1 race. 2005 European Grand Prix, the 1969 Italian Grand Prix, 1982 Austrian Grand Prix, 1986 Spanish Grand Prix, 1967 Italian Grand Prix, 1970 Monaco, and then, of course, number 1, the 1971 Italian Grand Prix. Let us know what we got right and wrong. Kevin.turner@allsport.com. I'll pass on the ones that are printable to Roger. The others I'll just put in the bin or something. Or maybe I'll pass them to you, Stuart. You can get those, the difficult ones. So hopefully you've enjoyed this run through our first top 10 in our countdown of the top 100 greatest World Championship races. Thank you very much to Stuart. Thank you very much to Roger. And thanks very much for listening. We'll be back soon with another Autosport Podcast.